It was a quiet Thursday morning when Sarah sat down at her kitchen table, sipping on a cup of coffee. Her life in many ways felt like a routine. Wake up, go to work, handle the endless demands of life and repeat. It wasn't that she hated her life, but something was missing. She had dreams, big ones that seemed just out of reach. It wasn't a lack of trying. Sarah had been working for years, striving for more than the usual 9 to 5 grind. But no matter how hard she tried, the dreams always stayed as dreams. She couldn't shake the feeling that something within her was holding her back. She had seen others succeed, friends, colleagues, even strangers, and it made her wonder, why not me? That morning, as she scrolled through her phone, a quote popped up in her feed: "Your thoughts create your reality." It was one of those posts that made you stop for a moment. She wasn't new to motivational quotes, but this one hit different. It made her pause, really think, and ask herself, what if my thoughts are the problem? She thought about the many times she had doubted herself. The times when fear and self-criticism would rise up and tell her she wasn't good enough. What if all the negativity she allowed to cloud her mind was the reason her dreams never materialized? A flicker of realization passed through her. Maybe her story wasn't just about the circumstances around her. Maybe it was the story she had been telling herself, a story that kept her stuck. Maybe it was time for her to take control. Sarah wasn't the only one who had struggled with negative thoughts. It was a pattern she saw in the people around her. Whether it was a coworker, a family member, or a friend, everyone seemed to be battling with the same internal struggles: self-doubt, fear, and the feeling that they weren't enough. She was beginning to wonder if there was more to this than mere coincidence. The next day she took action. She committed to making a change, but not just any change, a transformation. It wasn't about changing the world around her. It wasn't even about changing her job. It was about changing how she saw herself. Sarah decided to rewrite her story. She started with small things. In the mirror, she began repeating, "I am enough," and "I have what it takes to succeed." At first, it felt silly, but something inside her stirred. Every time she doubted herself, she reminded herself of her worth, of her potential. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she'd look at the mirror and still feel the weight of her insecurities. But every time she faced those doubts, she reminded herself that thoughts were just that, thoughts. They weren't truths. They were stories she had the power to change. As the days went by, Sarah started to notice something extraordinary. The more she changed her thoughts, the more her circumstances began to shift. It wasn't that her external world had changed, not yet anyway, but she was beginning to see it differently. Her mindset had shifted from one of fear and scarcity to one of abundance and possibility. She realized something important. Thoughts were not just fleeting ideas. They were powerful forces that shaped her reality. Her thoughts about herself, her work, and her life had created the life she was living. If she wanted something different, she needed to think differently. She made a commitment to herself, to shift her thinking every time fear or self-doubt crept in. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was worth it. She was no longer willing to let her limiting beliefs control her future. Sarah realized that the power to shift her story was within her all along. She had just never recognized it. But like any journey of transformation, there were challenges ahead. One evening, after a long day at work, Sarah sat down on her couch, feeling defeated. She had made progress, but the old thoughts still lingered. They whispered, "You'll never be successful. You don't have the skills or resources to make it. You've failed before, why would it be different this time?" The inner struggle was real. The negative thoughts felt heavy, like chains pulling her back into old habits. But Sarah had made a decision. She wasn't going to be controlled by those thoughts anymore. She took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to her mirror. She looked at her reflection and said, "I am stronger than my doubts. I am worthy of my dreams." That night, Sarah learned something invaluable. The battle was never against her circumstances. It was against the thoughts that tried to define her. And with every small victory over those thoughts, she was getting closer to the life she truly wanted. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah's transformation became more apparent. She began to see opportunities where she once saw obstacles. She applied for a job she once thought was out of her league and got an interview. She started networking with people who inspired her and learned from their success stories. She took on projects at work that pushed her limits, and each time she succeeded. But it wasn't just about external success. Sarah felt different. She felt confident in herself, in her abilities. She no longer waited for the world to change her. She had taken the first step, and the rest was falling into place. One afternoon, as she sat down at her favorite cafe, Sarah took out her journal. She wrote, "My thoughts created my reality. I am no longer a prisoner to my past story. I am the author of my future. Her mind, once clouded with fear and self-doubt, was now clear and focused. She knew that the power of her thoughts had shifted her entire life. And it was just the beginning. As Sarah continued to change her internal story, the ripple effect spread. Her friends and family began to notice the difference in her energy. They saw her pursuing her goals with confidence and clarity, and they asked her what had changed. Sarah began to share her journey with them, explaining how shifting her thoughts had shifted her life. Soon, others around her began to adopt the same mindset. Her co-workers started taking more risks, her friends started pursuing their dreams, and even her family began to look at life with a more positive perspective. It was as if the transformation was contagious. Sarah realized that changing her thoughts wasn't just about changing her own life, it was about inspiring others to rewrite their own stories as well. She saw how her transformation had created a ripple effect, one that spread hope and empowerment to everyone she encountered. Months later, as Sarah reflected on her journey, she realized something profound. It wasn't just about achieving her goals or external success. It was about the person she had become in the process. She had shifted from someone who felt powerless and limited to someone who believed in her worth and her ability to create change. She had learned that the power to shape her life was in her hands all along. The story she had been telling herself was the key to her transformation. Sarah smiled, knowing that her journey wasn't over. She had rewritten her story, but she also knew there were new chapters ahead, filled with more growth, more challenges, and more victories. But no matter what came next, Sarah knew one thing for sure: the power to create her future was within her thoughts. And now she was in full control of her story.